We're in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 18. We're going to do the entire chapter this evening. We are right on track. To finish this class when we finish the quarter. So we've not fallen behind. We're not going to have to worry about making up any classes because I think we've got plenty of time to cover all of this material. So Revelation chapter 13. Let's go ahead and pull up the next slide this evening. This is our roadmap, if you will, to kind of help us know where we are in the book of Revelation and what we're doing. We are in the second half of the book. Remember that the book of Revelation, you're going to get really tired of hearing me say this every time, but the book of Revelation divides into two halves. You have chapters 1 through 11. That's the first half of the book. You have chapters 12 through 22. That's the second half of the book. Both halves of the book tell the exact same story. The only difference is that the first half of the book tells the story from the earthly perspective, if you will. The second half of the book, the second telling of the story, tells it from the standpoint of the deeper spiritual background. So we get the same story told twice from two different perspectives. And this evening, we are now in the second chapter of that second half. We started talking last class about chapters 12 through 14. This is a section of the book that talks about war. And specifically in chapters 12 and 13, we're reading about five characters. There's going to be a couple more that we're going to talk about yet. But we talked about the woman, the dragon, and the man-child in chapter 12. That was last class. We're talking this evening about the sea beast and the earth beast. Those are contained in chapter 13. And then we're going to continue on looking at the future chapters, and we're going to get the rest of the things there that you see on the screen. But that's our roadmap, just to kind of help us know where we are, maybe help us know where we're going as we go through this telling of this story, this book that is given to us, given to Christians in the first century to encourage them as they sought to live the kind of lives that Christ would have them to live, and as they sought to live those lives under terrible persecution. The book speaks to us today as well, even though we are not persecuted, at least not in the United States, in the way that these Christians were. It still has the message to us today to remain faithful to Christ, regardless of how things look on the earth. So that's the introduction. That's the roadmap. So we know where we are. Let's go ahead and get on moving down the road a little bit and talk about Revelation chapter 13. And I would invite you to read along with me as we read verses 1 through 10, and then we'll spend some time talking about it. So remember, in chapter 12, we had the three first characters. We had the woman, we had the dragon, and we had the man-child. Now we get our fourth character here in chapter 13. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Okay, so that's chapter 13, verses 1 through 10, talking about the sea beast. As you've gone through that reading along with me, you have probably picked up on some things that maybe just kind of struck you as you're reading the text, things that are familiar, some times and some descriptions. So let's spend a little time talking about that. I'm just going to say right off the bat that when we're looking at the sea beast here in the book of Revelation represents political power. We have the interplay here between the dragon. We remember the dragon. The dragon is Satan, the sea beast, and then we're also going to see here in the same chapter the earth beast. So what we have so far is we have the dragon from chapter 12 representing Satan. The dragon is Satan. That's what that's all about. Now we have this sea beast that comes along. What is he all about? Well, he represents political power. Specifically in the days that Revelation is written, it's talking about Rome. So if we want to say instead of political power, we want to say the sea beast is Rome. I'm not going to argue with you about that. I think probably a better way of understanding it is that he represents political power. He is described here in the text as having 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names written on its heads. Now, if you looked at that for just a moment, you thought about, 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems, you might have remembered how the dragon is described back in chapter 12. Go ahead and take your Bibles, just turn over a page into chapter 12 here of the book of Revelation, and let's notice how the dragon is described here. It's in verse 3. So chapter 12, verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. So the description is very, very similar, and yet it's a little bit different. So in both cases, there are 7 heads, and in both cases, there are 10 horns. But the dragon is depicted as having 7 diadems, whereas the sea beast is depicted as having 10 diadems. So with the sea beast, the crowns are on its horns. With the dragon, the crowns are on the heads. Okay? That is a fine distinction there. I don't think there's any significance to that, except to tell us as the reader that this sea beast is very closely associated with the dragon. These guys are partners. They go hand in hand. And I think that's what we need to get out of that, not trying to figure out, well, what's the difference? Why does he have 10 crowns and the other fellow's got 7 crowns? That is beyond the point of the book of Revelation. Remember, the book of Revelation gives us a lot of information, but not all of those details have significance. We need to see the bigger picture. A lot of the problems with how people understand Revelation and where they get lost in Revelation is they get lost in those little details trying to figure out what that's all about instead of seeing the big picture. So we have similarities between the sea beast and the dragon. Notice also here in Revelation chapter 13 that he is described, this sea beast is described as having elements of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. Now this is significant to us, and it helps us identify the sea beast. If you will take your Bibles, hold your spot there in Revelation 13. We're coming back. But go ahead and take your Bibles and go back to the Old Testament to Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, we get a description, something else that's going on there, a different vision, also in apocalyptic literature. And I want us to notice this together. So Daniel chapter 7, we're just going to read verses 1 through 7. In the first year of King Belshazzar, I hope everybody's found that. Daniel chapter 7 is where we're at. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared. So here he's going to tell us about the dream that he saw. I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. So first of all, notice that in Daniel's vision, where do these beasts come from? They come from the sea, okay? Verse 4, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now I want you to note here, In Daniel chapter 7, we get 4 beasts, okay? We've read I've got these on the slide a little bit backwards. Let's go back and look at it in the order that they're given to us. So the first beast that comes out of the sea is like a lion. The second beast that comes out is like a bear. And then the third beast that comes out is like a leopard. And then there is a fourth beast that is simply described as being terrifying. It's not identified with any particular animal. What's going on here in Daniel chapter 7 is we have a view of the coming kingdoms that are going to come onto the world stage and that are going to affect God's people. So you have here in these kingdoms, if we're going to count backwards, let's count forwards. We're going to start with the day of Daniel, okay? So Daniel, the first kingdom there is going to be Babylon. Following Babylon, we've got the Persians, that's represented by the bear. Following the Persians, we have the Greeks. They're represented by the leopard. And then that fourth beast is going to be representing the next empire that's going to come along, which is Rome. So notice, though, that in Daniel chapter 7, those are 4 distinct kingdoms or empires that are going to come onto the world stage. When you go back to Revelation chapter 13, go ahead and go back to Revelation 13 with me. When you go back to Revelation 13 and you see how this sea beast is described, he's got elements of those 3 earlier kingdoms. This beast here in Revelation chapter 13 is the culmination, if you will, of these previous kingdoms. He is representing to us that fourth beast in the book of Daniel chapter 7, where we have that fourth beast that comes up. That represents Rome back there in Daniel chapter 7. Here the sea beast represents political power, which of course in the immediate context of the book of Revelation is talking about the Roman Empire. So we need to note that. We need to note these connections between the two. I often tell people that if you're going to study the book of Revelation, you have to be familiar with the Old Testament, especially Old Testament apocalyptic literature, and most especially the book of Daniel, particularly the second half, but also elements of the first half. Daniel of the Old Testament is one of those books that will help us immensely. When we understand Daniel, it will help us immensely in understanding the book of Revelation. So we have the sea beast that's given these descriptions. The sea beast, then the text tells us, receives power, throne, and authority from the dragon, from Satan. So Satan is the one that gives this power and this throne and this authority to this sea beast. Now, the sea beast is also described in verse 3 here of chapter 13 as having a mortal wound that isn't mortal. Let's read verse 3 again. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Again, the point of that is not for us to get lost into all this kind of discussion. Well, who is that? How is it that this head has this mortal wound? The mortal wound is healed. Is that somebody in particular? What's that about? No. I'm going to suggest to you this evening that what that's all about is that this empire has moments of weakness, has moments when it looks like it's going to be down, but whoops, it comes right back up and just keeps right on going along. When you think about the Roman Empire is going to exist as an empire. Not as a kingdom, okay? As a kingdom, it's going to be much older. But as an empire, the Roman Empire is going to last some 400 years in the West. And of course, there were times when they were at the height of their power, times when they were not. But they succeed in staying on the world stage for a very long period of time. As a matter of fact, up until this period of time, I can't think of any world empire, at least not in the ancient Near East, that maintained its power for that length of time. Babylon certainly did not. Persia did not. Greece did not. Rome is going to last much longer than these previous empires. All right, so it has a mortal wound that's not mortal. And then the whole earth worships the dragon and the beast. So they're worshiping the dragon, that's Satan. They're worshiping the beast as well, who is closely allied to Satan. That's that political power, or Rome, if you will, if you want to think about it in that way. This sea beast speaks blasphemous words against God and against those who dwell in heaven. Now, let me just say this about this. Because we look at that text and we say, well, what's going on there? Remember at the very beginning of this class when we had the introduction to the book of Revelation, we talked about the fact that what's going to get Christians into trouble with the Roman Empire is that the Roman emperors considered themselves to be gods. And they expected their citizens to worship them as such. Now, most Roman emperors didn't really take that very seriously. But in the days of John, and in the days in which Revelation is written, the emperor was Domitian, and Domitian did take this seriously. He expected people to worship him, and Christians wouldn't do that. And as a result, they were branded as disloyal to the empire and disloyal to the emperor. So when you have this guy speaking blasphemous words against God, against those who dwell in heaven, when a man claims to be deity, that's exactly what's going on. It's a very good description of what the emperors are doing, and particularly during the days of Domitian. The sea beast, then, we read, is going to exercise authority for 42 months. Now that number should have jumped out at you again as we were reading the chapter, because we read these numbers already. We read these numbers with the measuring of the temple. We read these numbers or their equivalent with the two witnesses that are going to prophesy. 42 months, that's equivalent to 1,260 days. Remember, a lunar month, 30 days. And 42 months is also 3.5 years. It is half of 7. 7 represents completion, perfection, a perfect amount. 3.5 is half of that. So he's going to exercise authority. Maybe it's for a long time, but it's not going to be a perfect amount of time. His authority is not perfect, and his exercising of that authority is not perfect. He is going to make war on the saints, and he conquers them, at least in the short term, okay? So the text tells us that he overcomes the saints. Now, that is a word that in the book of Revelation is generally applied to the Lamb overcoming, generally applied to saints overcoming with the Lamb. In this particular case, it is applied to the sea beast's war against the people of God, and it says that he's going to conquer them. Now, in the overall scope of Revelation, it's not going to be a permanent victory, but it's going to sure look like one in the short term. And that's exactly the problem that these Christians are dealing with, because they're living day to day and they look at what's happening around them. They remember their friend Antipas, who's killed. He's martyred for Christ. They see other brothers and sisters who are suffering, and in their days, it sure looks like what? It sure looks like the sea beast is winning and they're losing. The overall context of Revelation, though, and the overall message is that may be what it looks like short term. Long term, it's going to be very, very different. Okay, just a couple of more things to say about verses 1 through 10. There is an issue here, verses 9 and 10. Maybe as you were reading along with that, you noticed that it just seemed to be kind of hard to understand what's going on there. Let me read that verse again. I'm gonna go backwards on that slide, okay, so that you don't have that just yet. Verses 9 and 10, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Okay, so there are some difficulties in the translation here from Greek into English, and so as a result of that, there have been various explanations that have been given. Homer Haley, in his commentary on the book of Revelation, gives two explanations that have been given. The first of those is the people of the world who would lead the saints into captivity shall themselves be held in the captivity and damnation of sin. Those who kill saints with the sword shall themselves be killed with the sword. A second explanation that's given is the saints who are destined for captivity or death shall yield. They shall not retaliate in kind, for their master has said, all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. I'm going to offer to you yet a third explanation, and I can't quote this and attribute this to anyone because it's my own explanation, so I put my name at the end of that. You can take it for what it's worth, leave it if it's not worth anything. But this is how I would word it. Captivity and the sword are what Christians can expect from this sea beast. Thus, there is a call for the saints to have endurance and faith, because neither the dragon nor the sea beast, or anyone else for that matter, will ultimately prevail against God. To me, that particular understanding of these verses fits within not only the immediate text, but also fits within the context of Revelation. Christians are being told what you're going to expect from this sea beast is persecution. He's going to put some of you into captivity. He's going to put some of you to the sword. You need to endure. You need to have faith, because ultimately the sea beast is going to lose. And by the way, that's described in the book of Revelation. Okay? So those are some possibilities there. You may have another possibility, another interpretation. Think about that a little bit. Take these things into consideration and look and see what makes sense for you. Probably it doesn't really matter whether we're explanation A, B, or C as far as our overall understanding of the book. All right, let's continue on then in the text. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 13 and let's read together verses 11 through 18. So this is going to get us to the end of the chapter. We have that, what would now be our fifth character of the seven, and that is the second beast, or the earth beast, if you will. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. Okay, remember, the previous one came out of the sea, like those animals in Daniel chapter 7. This one comes out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. By the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. You were probably thinking as you read chapter 13, there we go, we're finally going to get to that number 666, and we are, just not quite yet. All right, so this earth beast here that's described in verses 11 through 18 is also identified as the false prophet. Look with me, if you would, in Revelation chapter 19. Just hold your spot there. Revelation chapter 19 and verse 20. Revelation chapter 19 and verse 20. We're going to come to this chapter later in the class. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Clearly here, by how the false prophet is described, he is being identified with the earth beast of chapter 13. Look with me now at Revelation chapter 20 and verse 10. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. Remember, that's the dragon, okay? The dragon of chapter 12 is Satan, is the devil. So the devil is thrown into the lake of fire, where the beast and the false prophet were. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So we have the three here. The unholy trinity, if we can say it that way. You have the devil, the dragon. You have the beast, that's the sea beast, that's political power. Then you have the prophet, that's identified as the earth beast in chapter 13. All three of them together, what happens to them? They are thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. All right, so what does the earth beast represent here in Revelation chapter 13? He represents false religion, paganism, which went hand in hand with political power. This is a little bit difficult for us as Americans to understand, because we have such clearly defined separation of church and state. It's very difficult for us to understand this, because most of you listening to this broadcast or participating in the study this evening, have never lived in a place where there was an official state religion. But really, that's kind of an unusual thing in human history, because in human history, most political powers have been closely joined with whatever the dominant religion of their kingdom or their empire was. And it was that way in the Roman Empire as well, because you had the Roman government that was exercising authority, but going right along with it was Roman religion. You may remember when we talked about the 7 letters to the churches, we showed some pictures. There were temples to these Greek gods and these Roman gods. There were temples to Roma, the deified empire, the deified city of Rome. There were temples to the various Roman emperors as well. So false religion, paganism, went hand in hand, joining together with that political power. They supported one another. Paganism was supported from the coffers of the state, and then paganism turned right around. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak, supported that political power. Okay, so the false prophet, the earth beast here, represents false religion. So the unholy trinity, if you will, that's pictured here in the book of Revelation is Satan, political power, and now religious power, false religion. All right, so the earth beast is then able to work signs which the people will follow. And we get a question here in the text, and that question is, are these real miracles or are these deceptions? In other words, is he actually performing miracles, or is he just deceiving people, making them think he's performing miracles? Let me throw some verses out here to look at. Look with me if you would. Hold your spot there in Revelation chapter 13. Let's look together in Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. This is talking about the days prior to the fall of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans in 70 AD, okay? And in Matthew chapter 24, in this great text that talks about that, in verse 24, Jesus says, "For false Christ, false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, verse 25, I have told you beforehand." So if they say to you, "Look, he is in the wilderness," do not go out. If they say, "Look, he is in the inner rooms," do not believe it. Okay? So Jesus says there are going to be false Christs, false messiahs, false prophets that are going to come along in those days. They're going to perform great signs and wonders. Don't you believe it, is what Jesus says. It isn't me, and they are not from me. Doesn't really answer the question about whether these are real miracles or deceptions or not. Let's look on. Let's look in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 9 and following. We're going to read verse 9 all the way down. I think we'll just read down to 12. So 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 9, "The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore," verse 11, "therefore God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." You know, there is a saying, isn't there, that there are none so blind as those who will not see. It's kind of what's being described here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 9. Talks about the fact that this lawless one is going to come. It's out of the context of our class to talk about that. But this lawless one is hand in hand with Satan. He's going to come. He's got power. He can do false signs and wonders. It's wicked deception. And God is going to allow people to be deceived by that. Why? Because they did not believe the truth and had pleasure in unrighteousness. In other words, when people are not disposed to believing the truth, they're going to believe anything. Boy, is that not a commentary on modern society today in the United States with our social media. Here we are on Facebook doing this Bible study. I'm incredibly glad that we have this medium where we can do this Bible study. But otherwise, I have to tell you, I have come to absolutely hate social media because of all the stuff that's out there and everything that comes along that everybody believes. That's what's being talked about. This guy in 2 Thessalonians can perform false miracles, false deceptions. People will believe those because they want to not believe the truth. We have to have, as disciples of Christ, we have to have a disposition that causes us to love the truth. Let's look at another example, our last one. We've got time, so we are going to get to the rest of the chapter, trust me. Acts chapter 8, and let's read verses 5 through 13. Philip went down to the city of Samaria. The gospel has reached Samaria. It's reaching them through Philip. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed to them the Christ. And the crowds with one accord paid attention to what was being said by Philip when they heard him and saw the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who had them. Many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was much joy in that city. But there was a man named Simon who had previously practiced magic in the city and amazed the people of Samaria, saying that he himself was somebody great. They all paid attention to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, "This man is the power of God that is called great." They paid attention to him because for a long time he had amazed them with his magic. But when they believed Philip, as he preached good news about the kingdom of Christ in the name of Jesus Christ, they were baptized, both men and women. Even Simon himself believed, and after being baptized, he continued with Philip. And seeing signs and great miracles performed, he was amazed. Why in the world was Simon amazed? He had been performing miracles and signs, right? No, he had been deceiving the people. He was an illusionist, if you will. He made the people think he had magic, but when Philip comes along and he sees what Philip is doing, he says, "This is the real thing," and he was amazed. So we've got people that are performing real miracles, but we've got false folks that are performing miracles that are really just deception. You know, in a long time ago, there was a fellow whose name was Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini was an escape artist. You could handcuff him and throw him in a cage and throw him in the ocean, the water, and he'd get himself undone and come out. And people were just amazed by that. There was no magic to that. He just knew how to get out of those things, and he did. But Harry Houdini spent time during his life debunking spiritualists, actually exposing the tricks that they used to convince people that they were actually talking to the dead. Harry Houdini could do that because he was familiar with the idea of deception, how to do things to make people think something was going on that it wasn't. All right, I'm going to pull up a quote here. This is from Homer Haley in his commentary on this text. He says this, and I think this is a good place to be with this understanding. If God allowed Satan to deceive by genuine miracles, he would therefore nullify his own witness to truth. Okay? And I think that's important for us to remember. Christ performed real miracles. His apostles performed real miracles. The early Christians performed real, genuine miracles. Satan, all across the board, simply tries to parrot and mimic those miracles, but the miracles, the things that he's doing, are just deception. That's true of the earth beast as well. All right, let's continue on looking at the earth beast. We're getting to that part that I know you're looking forward to getting to, where we get that number 666, right? Everybody wonders about 666 and what that's all about. All right, so the earth beast. The earth beast causes all to be marked on the right hand or forehead. We've seen this already, haven't we, in the book of Revelation? This idea of the saints being sealed, it denotes ownership. Okay? And so the earth beast is going to come along. He's going to cause all to be marked on the right hand or forehead. It is an imitation of the sealing of the 144,000. Remember this, Satan tries to imitate, but for evil purposes, the things that God does. And so God seals the 144,000. God seals the saints, marks them as his. The earth beast comes along, and he marks those who are his on the right hand or on the forehead. Those without the mark, the text tells us, cannot buy or sell. This is a reference to economic hardship. Okay, what's going on here? Remember, we talked about the 7 letters to the churches. Part of what's going on here is that Christians were persecuted in various ways. There were Christians who died for their faith. We know that. We read about Antipas in earlier parts of the book of Revelation. There were Christians who were imprisoned for their faith. That's John, the apostle here, that's writing the book of Revelation. There were Christians who were sent into exile for their faith. There were Christians who lost their jobs because of their faith, because in every Roman town, folks who worked in a particular trade all belonged to the local guild, the local trade union, if you will. And every trade union had a patron god, and they would worship that patron god as a part of what they did as a trade guild. Christians came along. Christians said, well, I want to be a part of the trade guild, but I can't worship this pagan god. So the trade guild said, well, if you're not going to worship our God, you're not going to be a part of the guild. And oh, by the way, if you're not a part of the guild, you can't work in your profession. So if you're a silversmith, if you've made your life, you've made your living throughout your life making silver jewelry, and maybe before you were a Christian, you were making silver idols as well, you're part of the guild of silversmiths in town X. Now you've become a Christian. You don't join in the annual banquet where they're worshiping whatever their god was. And so all the other silversmiths say, well, you can't work in this town anymore. Your business license has been revoked. Those without the mark cannot buy or sell. Sometimes we think about Christians in the first century as only suffering from the standpoint of being killed. But it was much, if I'll say it this way, and I hope you won't misunderstand, it was much worse than that, okay? Because not only could they be killed, they often faced economic hardship for years. People who had skills couldn't work in those skills, and because they couldn't work in those skills, they couldn't make money, and their livelihood was endangered. So all across the board, Christians were suffering because they were Christians. And so if we limit it just to dying, I mean, let's be honest. We could look at that kind of crassly and say, well, okay, if you're fed to the lions, and that's probably over in about, 5 minutes, however long it takes a lion to kill somebody. But when we understand that folks might have had to go into a job where they couldn't really pay their bills and support their family because of the cause of Christ, it adds a dimension to this that Christians in the first century were suffering completely and totally in their lives for the cause of Christ. And yes, even after suffering economically, guess what still might happen? You still might get taken off to the arena and fed to the lions. So there wasn't any escape from that, so long as the government insisted on carrying those measures out. And they would off and on for about 200 years before finally that stopped. All right, so those without the mark, the earth beast causes them to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. The mark itself consists of the name or the number of the name of the sea beast. Okay, and here's where we get the number 666. Oh boy, this is where lots of people have gone wild with what 666 is all about. People have tried to figure out, well, who is that exactly? I want you to note very, very carefully. Go back to Revelation chapter 13. I want you to note very, very carefully what the text says. So you're in Revelation chapter 13. Look with me verses 16 through 17. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the number of the beast or the number of its name. The beast here that we're talking about is what? Pagan religion. Not an emperor, not a particular man, but pagan religion. This calls for wisdom, verse 18. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Okay, so what's going on here? Note with me, if you will, that the number here is not the number of the man, but the number of a man, representing something human. The sea beast isn't something supernatural. The sea beast is pagan religion that is being exercised. The pagan religion that's being exercised. I have a typo there on the slide. I'm just sitting here looking at it, realizing it. Let me gather my thoughts because I'm seeing I've got a typo there. So, and it's a typo that's completely messes up the thought. So, the number is representing, I want to go back and look at the text to make sure I got this right. Yes, Okay, so the number is representing something human. That's part where it says the sea beast, human power exercised in the human political arena. Let's change that. The earth beast. That's the beast that's under consideration here in the text. It's human power exercised in a human religious arena, okay? Because that's what the earth beast is going and doing. So if we're sitting here saying, well, 666, well, we can play with our letters a little bit and we can get Nero out of that. We can play with the numbers a little bit more and we can get Hitler out of that. We can play with the numbers a little bit more and we can get Stalin out of that. We've missed the entire point of the text. The entire point of the text is that this number represents failure multiplied. 6 is 1 short of 7. Oh, the earth beast is going to wage war against God's people. And he's going to do everything he can in conjunction with the sea beast. Pagan religion, political power, exercising their power together, helping. They're like two blind men helping each other walk down the road. And that's exactly how the book of Revelation depicts them. 666, failure. They're not going to succeed. Beale in his commentary, I do have a quote here that might help us understand this a little bit better. Beale in his commentary says this. He says, therefore, the large number of conflicting solutions to trying to find a person who corresponds to 666, what he's talking about there, argues against a literal calculation method as ever yielding the right interpretation. If the number were intended to be identified with some ruler by means of such a literal calculation, it would be a rare exception from the way numbers are employed elsewhere in the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. There is no evidence of any other number in the book being used in such a way. All the numbers have figurative significance and symbolize some spiritual reality and never involve any kind of literal gematria. That word gematria, I've added a note there. That's a system of using letters to represent numbers and the calculating of values of names and words. Never involve any kind of literal gematria calculation. So if we're sitting there looking at 666, well, who could that represent? Nero, Hitler, Stalin, depending upon what political party you belong to, you may think that's referring to the other person who's running for office. That's not the point of Revelation. Revelation is telling us this this earth beast, along with his partner, the sea beast, and ultimately the one behind them, the dragon, are doomed to failure. They will not succeed. All right, let me just say a couple of things. We're at the end of our class almost. Let me just say a couple of things about this. This text with 666 has been the playground of lots of false teachers for a while now. It's not died away. I recently saw something on Facebook, no less. I recently saw something where someone posted an article that said, when there's a new vaccine for this virus, I'm not going to take the vaccine because they're going to insert a chip into me, and that's what's being talked about here in Revelation chapter 13, the mark of the beast. That's going to be that chip that's inserted with the vaccine. Now, let me just stop. If you don't want to take a vaccine because you don't like vaccines, that's fine. If you don't want to take vaccines because you don't want to be a guinea pig, that's fine. If you don't want to take vaccines because you don't think vaccines are good and we're better off without having them, that's fine. Not going to argue with any of that. That's your choice. But if you argue that we can't have the vaccine as Christians because Revelation chapter 13 tells us that that's the mark of the beast, then I got to tell you, I'm going to argue with you all day about that because that is not what the text says, and it's not what the text teaches. We need to be real careful, especially during times of social upheaval, social difficulties, that we don't take the book of Revelation, twist it out of the context that it was given in, and give it a meaning that God never intended for the book to have. All right, that's Revelation chapter 13.